Okay, I hope that you can understand me well. Welcome to everybody to this final event of our GCS colloquium series in this running term. And this is, in a way, a wrap-up session with Dr. Gudrun Wacker. We are very happy to have her. She is a Swabian scholar and has worked at the Department of Chinese and Korean Studies, as it was called at the time, for many years, back in the 80s, in the early 1990s, before switching over to the Federal Institute for Russian, East European, and International Studies in Cologne, which, as far as I remember, ceased to exist in the late 1990s, and then she changed to the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, shifted to that very famous institute, in German Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik, the most important think tank um, in Germany, funded partly by the foreign ministry and being there to provide expertise on all world regions. Gudrun Wacker has been working during her whole career in Berlin in the research division on Asia, and she has published extensively on a number of issues, all related to East Asian politics, particularly China, also Taiwan, but also regional issues pertaining to security and multilateral cooperation. And she is also always focused on transatlantic US-China relations. And today, as a wrap-up session, she is with us to shift perspective, to look a little bit from China to the world. And that will probably be a very interesting session. I'm very sure about this. So Gudrun, the digital floor is yours for about 25 or 30 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gunther. I'm always happy to be back in Tübingen, where I lived for 15 years when I was much younger than I am now. And a small correction, our institute is funded 90+% by the Chancellor's office, not by the Foreign Ministry.
Oh.
That's important because one of our missions is to advise the German Parliament, which is our most difficult client, I would say, because the interest in foreign and security policy is sort of limited there. But we also advise all the ministries and the Chancellor's office, of course. So for today, I thought I'd bring a PowerPoint presentation. I don't know how it will work out with the timing. I hope you can all see the PowerPoint now. The topic that
Yes.
was assigned to me is Chinese perceptions of a world in turmoil. So I was thinking a lot about the perception part and also when the world in turmoil started from the Chinese perspective. And this explains the structure I chose. So there is a small introduction, and then I picked out four you could say, big events that, from my perspective, shaped China's not only perception, but also its behavior. It's the global financial crisis, because I think that this is the point in time where the world in turmoil really started from China's perspective. Then there is Xi Jinping taking over the highest offices. There are the Trump years, so you will probably hear some stuff that Eberhard Sennschneider addressed in his speech. And the last point is the corona pandemic and the battle of narratives we have seen unfold there. And there will be some conclusions in the end. So let's start with the introduction. And these are a few caveats, because there are no equivalents to Western public opinion polls in China. Like we all know the Pew Global Views, etc. So we know pretty much what the attitude in Europe and in the US is vis-a-vis China, but we don't have the same sort of data from China. And so our main sources are to analyze Chinese media and social media, official speeches and documents. I like to use Chinese cartoons and propaganda videos because they really bring to a visual point what the perspective of China is. So you have to take everything I will say in the following as a broad generalization and also focusing only on certain aspects that I think are relevant. So let's start with the global financial crisis as a turning point in China's global stance. 10 years ago, when I was in China, somebody told me this joke, and I want to start with that. And the joke goes as follows: 1949, only socialism can save China. 1979, only capitalism can save China. 1989, only China can save socialism. And 2009, this is the point of the global financial crisis, only China can save capitalism. And you see the small cartoon, the people, or it's really one person in the cartoon that has predicted China's collapse for, from time and again and again. And always China came out stronger of the crisis. And I think this is one of the perceptions that at least the Chinese leadership tries to spin in the Chinese population. But it's clear that since China recovered pretty fast from the global financial crisis, there was a new self-confidence in the aftermath of the crisis. If you think back, it was also the time when the Olympic Games took place in China, when the Shanghai Expo took place. So China had really arrived on the international parquet, so to speak. So there was a rethinking of China's role going on, and the biggest change that we see, and this has a lot to do with Xi Jinping, is that the whole notion of keeping a low profile, or Tao Guang Yang Hui, was given up. Some academics and politicians might be critical of this change in Chinese politics, but Xi Jinping really drove this. So he, when he took over, he launched a whole series of positive narratives, formulated a very ambitious agenda. And in all of these projects, we can see how China sees the world, and also how China deals with this new situation it finds itself in. So there is the China dream. I like to call it China dream, not the Chinese dream, because it sounds too much like the American dream, but it's actually very different. There are the two centennial goals with a broad vision for China's future. There is the big international initiative of One Belt, One Road, or Belt and Road Initiative, as it is called now, providing a vision for a connected world. There is the Made in China 2025, with formulating a very ambitious industrial agenda. We could argue that this probably is the only one that backfired on China, because, for example, in Germany, this was sort of a wake-up call that China really is becoming a serious competitor to our, advantages in this world. And then, and this is probably something that I would not have expected, because China always said it's not a model for other countries. There is this notion, usually translated as China solution, 中国方案. I don't think that 方案 really means solution. It's more an approach to deal with challenges. And this is actively propagated, that China can provide new approaches to tackle global challenges, and wants to be a contributor to global commons. And then when Donald Trump takes office, the reaction is that China, to be exact, Xi Jinping again in Davos, He says China will be the savior of globalization, of trade liberalism, and of multilateralism. There is a video that shows the China dream versus America first from November 2018, and it's really worthwhile watching that because it contrasts the positive narrative of China with what is conceived as Trump's nationalism and unilateralism. So I'm happy to share this presentation later if you want to check out the video. So the Trump years made a big difference for China. I think in the beginning, the perception of Donald Trump in China was very positive, including among the leadership, because first of all, Hillary Clinton was not popular. China was familiar with her because she was Secretary of State. So they didn't like her very much from experience. And Donald Trump was considered an orthodox politician, which made him very popular among Weibo in the social media in China. Not giving anything about political correctness, that was very popular, but also he was seen as a deal maker, and China knows how to make deals. So probably the expectation was that despite the rather belligerent rhetorics during the election campaign, this would follow the normal circle in US-China relations, that you have negative rhetoric on China during the campaign. It has a certain overlap when the new administration takes office, and then it returns all back to normal, and this kind of mix between engagement and containment. But this was not the case here. And so there was a lot of pressure coming from the US trade war. This had also a positive effect on China. I will come to that back later. But I think the Chinese perception is that it's very clear now that this is containment policy. And the manifestation of this containment policy is seen in the free and open Indo-Pacific concept. On the other hand, a lot of Chinese academics say this would have been much more effective if the US had not withdrawn from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, this free trade agreement that excluded China, but included a lot of Indo-Pacific countries. So if we look at the balance sheet, it's rather mixed, but we see that from the Chinese perspectives, the US credibility in terms of values has gone down very steeply. Double standards and hypocrisy rule. So this is about human rights. There is the George Floyd case, and also the dealing with protests, which played a role. In the case of Hong Kong, the US welcomed the protests and the riots, but on 6th of January this year, out of a sudden, they were all against such protests and riots. So this is seen as double standards and hypocrisy on the side of the United States. Then there is the credibility in terms of democracy, the inability to manage the COVID crisis, and also the whole chaos that surrounded the elections, and especially the aftermath of the elections when Donald Trump refused the result of democratic elections and tried everything to ignore the checks and balances or bend them to their will, let's put it this way. Also, the US has lost credibility as an alliance partner because during Donald Trump's 4 years, the alliance partners were also targets of US criticism. So, and the final point from the Chinese perspective is that it gave a lot of opportunities to improve China's role in international institutions and shaping the discourse in these institutions due to Donald Trump withdrawing the United States from many, like the world, not only the World Health Organization, but also, for example, the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. So the perception in general is that the US is in decline and there is a huge loss of credibility, which is sort of good for China and an opportunity to spin its own positive narrative. Finally, and very briefly on the corona pandemic, a colleague of mine has written a short analysis using the data on the health diplomacy that China unfolded after it had managed the crisis at home rather successfully from its own perspective. And I think it's really this narrative of success at home is something that is credible to the people in China. Probably not here so much, it's criticized, but the problem with our opinion polls is that they only cover the Western industrialized nations, but not, countries in Africa, in Latin America, that they might have a different view on China's health diplomacy. So all the health diplomacy was already in all of the Belt and Road MOUs that had been signed. Health was one dimension. So basically China could activate this part of the Belt and Road initiative that was already signed with many countries, providing public goods, sending medical teams, sending masks and other things. And there is this little video that demonstrates the battle of narratives on COVID between China and the US. If you have not seen it, check it out. Lego had to distance itself from this video. They said China did this without our knowing. But basically, the Chinese position is, we told you everything, we informed you early on, you wouldn't listen. It's quite funny to watch. And of course, as usual in these things, there is a bit of truth in it. And I come to the conclusion already. I think I'm still on time, maybe. I would say that from the Chinese perspective, a world in turmoil offers China opportunities to advance its own agenda. And the agenda at the international level is to make the international system more compatible with what China needs. It's not to destroy the international system. So this is my final point here, that if the international system is weakened and offers opportunities for China to improve its position therein, it's a good thing, it's beneficial. But if it's destroyed completely, it would be negative. So I think this is also why the Trump administration is a mixed thing, because if the international organizations which China has also benefited from are totally destroyed and something else or nothing replaces them, this is not a good starting position. China is convinced that US policy is now dominated by containment, and there is no expectation that the US-China policy will dramatically change under the Biden administration. I think there is a lot of realism in the assessment here. So minimum, they expect that they might become more stable and less erratic than under Donald Trump. I see a problem, and I have heard this at many conferences with Chinese colleagues, that there is a trend to perceive everything that US allies and friends do, like Australia and India, as simply through the prism of the US-China rivalry now. So if they do something that China doesn't like, they are punished for it. And we see this in the case of Australia very strongly at the moment. So I think it's a problem if China doesn't give these relationships with the neighboring countries and the countries in the region their own weight and simply perceives it through the prism of the US-China rivalry, which sort of, hangs over everything now. The EU is seen as sort of in between, but also weak and disunited. And last week we spoke about the comprehensive agreement on investment. I think the EU there handed a diplomatic victory to China at a time when it was politically probably not the most opportune moment to do that. So the EU is seen as kind of weak and driven by its economic interests. The 4 years of Donald Trump and the decoupling had the positive effect for China that it much strengthened their self-reliance, especially in terms of technology. They're not there yet, but semiconductors, chips is still a problem. But I think there has been a rally around the flag effect inside China due to the adversarial attitude of the United States. On core issues, China will not compromise. You see, for example, that when the Chinese media talked about the US-China trade war, they were very rational and, very held back on criticizing the US mostly. But when it comes to issues like Hong Kong and Taiwan, the tone becomes very, very different. And I end with this concept that the international system is still important to China, so they are not out there to destroy it, but to use it to their utmost advantage. And I thank you for your attention.